everybody. Welcome. Oh my gosh, we're getting people coming in. Literally, hi, Robert Charbonneau, and I'm sorry, I'm going to be referring to you by your first and last name probably the entire time because I just love your name, the way it just sounds together. So I apologize for that up front. And to literally, Andy. Andy's been working with me for almost 2 months now. And Andy, what happens right as I'm about to start it? Shit falls apart. My phone literally.
Oh God.
Ago. So sorry, everybody, for coming in, and we're starting a little late, but that's because Angela Murray's got her shit going on. So how are you guys?
I'm good. I'm just excited to talk about what we're going to talk about. There's going to be some good stuff
absolutely.
here. So it's been a long time waiting.
Absolutely. So Robert, I have not had the privilege or the pleasure of meeting you. So can you give me a 2.5 minute who you are and anybody else who might be joining us who might not be familiar with your amazingness? Who are you?
Yeah, it's good to meet you.
Thanks.
Yeah, my name is I'm Robert, and I'm a teacher at I teach English and journalism in Reno, Nevada.
Oh, wow. Well, I'm also an educator as well. Not quite the same subject as you, but super excited. So this is going to be a real deal kind of a discussion tonight.
Nice. What do you teach?
I'm technically what they call an intervention specialist, which is just a fancy term for special education teacher. But mind you, I have taught biology for the past 9 years. I've taught every subject there is. This isn't like a humble brag. It's just I've been in a co-taught. That's my jam, is bringing different types of learners into the general ed environment. I've had some amazing co-teachers in my career. So mostly done science the last couple of years, but Robert Charbonneau, I have taught English. In fact, I am actually in an English 3 co-taught class right now, reading All American Boys. I'm having a really great discussion about it.
Wait, an English 3 what? What was it? An English 3
co-taught, because that means that there are students who have just differences in learning.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah, so I am teaching English this year. We have not covered poetry. I just started second semester, but we're so I'm really looking forward to it. I'm in Ohio though, so
okay.
We'll have to chat afterwards, get some lesson plans coordinated across state lines.
Yeah. You guys just started your second semester?
No, we're actually wrapping up our last quarter. Sorry,
okay.
everybody. I know, sorry.
I was like, that sounds closer to where I'm at right now, but yeah, maybe you guys start later.
No, we're ending the first week of June, and then I'll have a summer break. Whatever that is, whatever. That's not a thing. Yeah, teachers.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Right? No.
But, I did ask my classmates, my students. We did a kind of a poll today. We're in the middle of state testing as well, so I did do a kind of a snapshot poll for the youth of America, whether or not they thought about our subject, is poetry dead? And I got to tell you, the results are inconclusive. They're all over the board. So we're going to have a real good debate tonight. So you're an educator, an English teacher, and also journalism, you said. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What do you love most about teaching? Because my students have no idea this is who I am. I hope not, at least.
They should. It seems like you have a lot of energy, and you probably are a lot of fun in class with your students.
I am, but my poetry is not school appropriate. It's too dark. Too disturbed. There's expletives.
Oh no! Oh well, I'm sure they use those anyway.
True. They actually hate me for this because anytime you hear the bitch, I go, "Where's the puppy? Is there a dog in class? I want to see." Or they say, "Hey, you're holding my shit. Give me my shit back." I go, "Ew! Why are you holding their poop or their feces?" I say feces because I teach bio, so they think I'm annoying. They think yeah, they love it.
I think that's part of the teacher's role, is to be annoying and make a bunch of mom or dad jokes. They secretly like it, I think. And at least that's what I tell myself.
But you seem to really enjoy the education life.
Yeah, I kind of fell into it. I wasn't, I got my master's in English, so I don't have an education degree. I work at a private high school, and so you don't have to have your teaching license to work there. But I have my master's in English, and so it wasn't my first choice. But I had I was adjuncting when I was getting my master's.
Sorry,
Into it, I wasn't.
sorry, that's my fault, y'all.
Oh wait.
I logged in and then my computer had the sound on like a fool. You know how it goes.
That's all right. Yeah, so I was adjuncting when I was doing my master's, and that was my first experience teaching. And I found that I really enjoyed it, which I did not expect. I was just kind of doing it because it lowered the payment for my tuition. But I found that I really enjoyed it, and then it kind of exposed me to the fact that I didn't know as much about the things that I thought I knew when I tried to explain them to other people, when I tried to teach them. And so that was a real learning experience. And so realizing that teaching is like another way of learning and understanding the things that I like to study anyway, that was kind of what drew me to it. And then this job came up, and I thought it would be a pretty good opportunity to try. And so yeah, I've been doing it for adjuncting and teaching for maybe like 6 or 7 years now, and
oh, wow.
Yeah, really love it. Yeah.
So Andy's brought this up a couple of times. Andy was really, really excited about this conversation. I'm really glad, Andy, you brought this up, and I desperately to hear also what your perspective is on it. Did you've been talking about this conversation for a while about is poetry dead?
Because I remember when we the first episode I did with Robert Charbonneau, I know we had a discussion about, his life, is about also talking about poetry and talking about how, just basically, is it dead, or is it just distorted, or is it just, like what's going on? Because it doesn't seem to see a lot of it like how we used to, as opposed to like the days of Allen Ginsberg. How come poetry and writing seemed to have an impact at that time? How come that same impact or similar impact is not as it is today? And then he did lives, one with Cassie, I think it was, you did it with, and then the first one you did with somebody, I think his name was Marcus or something. And it was very interesting because one thing you said that I found interesting was that you believe that poetry is connected to language, and that it's an art form, and the reason why people feel like it's dead because they feel like it's an art form that serves no purpose in society or public life. And it's interesting because I feel personally that I don't think it's dead. I think it's just gotten lost for a long time, but in a way that, I don't want to say distorted, but it's like, I feel like maybe if we redirect poetry, then maybe it could have a more lasting impact, like as it did in the 50s and the 60s. Because if you look at poetry, it comes in different shapes and form. It comes in music as well, and I feel like with music, specifically hip hop music, I feel like it's gotten so destroyed. But I don't think it's dead. I think it just needs some kind of revival in a way that it's like, okay, I don't want to say it's dying. It's just not in the direction that it needs to be. I think it's more like a distortion, I guess. Yeah, I might as well. Yeah, I think it's more distorted, and it needs to redirect itself because it's lost this sense of direction. And maybe if we redirect it somehow, some way, then maybe it could be have an impact again. And I was reading some articles that you had mentioned in one of your lives, which is interesting. But before I get into that, I want to see what you guys thought about what I was saying just now.
Andy, I think that was really a great opener. I did want to mention that Angela Sam had already mentioned that she's found that Instagram's made poetry more accessible. I actually almost have the alternate opinion on that, but I don't want to discuss Instagram yet. I think that is definitely like Instagram and some mediums of like how is poetry accessible or how is poetry being marketed. But Robert, why don't you go ahead and you start because you're the guest and you're the one really opening this dialogue. And again,
this is true, yeah.
Andy and I, we believe in the open mic style. So before, Robert, we definitely want to start you off real strong. We'll give you the mic, so to speak. And Robert Charbonneau, if you don't know, Angela Murray, she talks too much. So you cut me off, okay? But folks, if you want to jump in or if you have a comment or a question, please don't hesitate. You can put something in the chat. There is a question button that you can add a question to us, and we'll be able to get that right away. Or We watch on the live mic too. So please, like, this is a conversation for all of us to be having. But Robert, you're a guest, so we want you to steer the ship. So what do you got for us?
Yeah, I think I posted a couple of things maybe at the beginning of the year after I had read this article. Can't remember what it was in now, the Atlantic or the Times, or but this person was making the point that is brought up, I would say once every few years into the public conversation about the place of poetry in culture, and it always seems to revolve around the idea that poetry is dead, or people don't read poetry anymore, and poetry is on the decline. And I've been thinking about it back in school when I was like collecting these articles, and every time it comes up I kind of add it to the stack, and I find it an interesting idea, and I find it interesting that the only way that the conversation about poetry rises into the public domain is when we're talking about what the value or the importance of poetry is. And I think that that's maybe worth thinking about as a poet. Why does the larger culture, when they turn their eyes towards poetry, think that poetry is dead, or that it doesn't really exist anymore? To a certain extent, I think that they are right. I think that it is dead, or it's always been. There's a couple of different ways you look at it. I think it's definitely not as popular as it used to be anymore. There's also the stance that maybe poetry has never really had a large place in the public dialogue, and so it makes no sense to even say that it's dead because it's never really been that alive anyway.
Interesting. Because a lot of the comments I got from adults were, because the only thing I have color coordinated on the snapshot from at work today is that I left the adults in orange, because I want to know what the youth, I called them the youth, because they're definitely not their age, versus, the other adults who are educators. Because those adults, as far as the sample size goes, I'm talking to future millionaires, billionaires, I'm talking to future, doctors, potential writers, potential journalists, potential, insurance salesmen. But I wanted to keep the adults separate from that. But a lot of the adults that were like, yes, they said poetry never dies. Poetry never dies. But you said poetry never dies because you said it never was alive in the first place. I found that very interesting. Also, Robert, this came up a lot too, and maybe this is really where this discussion actually lies, is what is poetry?
Yeah, I think that's what the maybe the topic elicits is, if it's dead, like, what is it that's died? And to that extent, I think the question is a good springboard, because it does impose the question on you for you to come up with an idea for what is poetry. Is there something that's called poetry that still has value today? And yeah, I think maybe Andy brought it up before. I think when we were talking last, that I think poetry is in a very deep way related to language, which is in itself in a way related to thought itself, and so I think that what poetry is, it has something to do with its connection on a very deep level with thought, and how we come up with thoughts, and how we kind of modulate and change our thoughts with the techniques of poetry, which I think are like the use of figurative language and I would say figures of sound and figures of thought. Yeah, I'm interested. What did you ask when you took that poll? Is that just is poetry dead, a left and right, and then they just put their sticker on one side or the other, and then you talk about it?
So I it wasn't that deep. Honestly, I just wanted their opinion. So I asked as many students as I could throughout the day, whether they're walking through the halls or they happened to be in the classroom for state testing, or they were my own student throughout the day that I actually got to see. Oh my gosh, I haven't taught English that well. And it literally was just a yes or no. Not everybody answered. And there actually were quite a few people that were undecided, so they were able to just put it straight down the middle. So there isn't necessarily a spectrum. And this is not scientifically sound. As a science teacher, I would also discuss that I would not publish this as actual data. This was just a sample size of whether or not what you thought walking through. But again, I got a lot of great comments. A lot of them, some of them who said yes said it's dead, or no, actually this one student said it's not dead. It's just we don't do it the same way as it was. And I thought that was very profound. Also, I happen to be very lucky recently. I've been able to kind of leave my troubles behind, Robert Charbonneau, and I got to go on a few little vacations, so to speak. And I went and stopped in Nashville. And I happened to meet a really awesome group of people who have been doing a lot of live mics, whether it's for adults, but they also did, I think, some work trying to get some students or young students involved. I think they had students come in from out of town. I don't know if they're here, if they could talk about that, or if we can get them on our show. I know I reached Andy, we talked about potentially getting one of the people to talk on the show if they can talk about that. But I think there is something about the live poetry experience that is actually what could be what revives it. Whether it is a spoken word or just a poetry reading. But one student also who I did not necessarily have as a student of mine, I happened to come into a classroom a little bit early to get set up for my 8th period. And I asked, again, I'm saying, if I hadn't seen you in the hallway and you hadn't voted in this poll, can I ask your opinion? Do you think poetry is dead? And then the student happened to come up to me afterward and say, are you doing it? Is there anything going on with poetry here? And I go, oh, there's tons of stuff going on. I'll get you connected with the librarians. They do a lot of stuff with poetry clubs. And there's also some other resources in the neighborhood because that area that the school is in is very rich with artists and poets, and it's a great community. Although, of course, there's also a lot of educational, institutional stuff that we can get into in a different discussion, Robert, because I know we can get educational speak here.
Right.
But
I just want to.
What I want to say, though, let me finish the thought, Andy, is that the point I was trying to make is that they asked about poetry slam, and that he mentioned that he had done a poetry slam and asked this other teacher who had asked about it, because the poetry slam, the spoken word, I think since we're losing the movie theaters, we don't have the malls, this could be the potential thing that brings us back together.
Wow, she just did like a whole. You just did a whole science experiment. Oh my God, it's so good though. I want to read because I think what they're saying in the comments aligns with what you're saying. So Angela _Psalm says, do we want its popularity, or do we prefer what just happened? Or do we prefer the underground nature of poetry? And then Elijah Abraham said, poetry was more private, personal speech to a selected individual, not to be open or to over mainstream society. Okay, I keep losing the.
Sorry,
okay, hold on. I'm sorry.
I keep doing it. I'll wait until you're done doing it. I'm sorry, dude. It's my
yeah.
Robert, I do that to Andy. Mess him up.
Okay, now. Yeah, no. Now I can't find his. Hold on, I was reading. Okay. Poetry is more of a personal, private speech to be selected individuals, not to be open or over mainstream society. I find which makes it better for it, not common, but very greatly appreciated. And then another person says, we've seen an upsurge in live open mics and poetry events in my area. It is pretty cool in my opinion. So I guess what the first question is, Oh, yeah, and then Angela Sam also said, I've always loved writing poetry, but it seemed like a lost art here in Australia, other than poetry nights here, but have found a revival. So I guess the question is, do we want popularity, or do we prefer the underground nature of poetry, which is very interesting. Would you consider this an underground form of poetry, or do you think the undergrounds are more like the open mics that only you get invited to, like one of those like not a secret show, but only word of mouth type of event. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think it's probably all underground. There's open mics, and I've read some articles about how those are kind of flourishing as well. And um, you know, there's also in academic or in academia, poetry is fine, and you're always going to find poetry in the New Yorker, and there's plenty of lit magazines, and but I think when you compare it to any other art, if you compare it to film or television, if you compare it to maybe music, which I think we could talk about maybe the crossover between music and poetry, because I think there definitely is some. When you compare it to other forms of art, it's definitely down here, where in terms of how many people actually consume it and seek it out and look for new poetry outside of maybe the hardcore fan base of poetry. And I think that's one of the tests of whether or not an art is alive and well, is how much is it sought out by people who don't actually practice it. And so I'm not a musician, but I love listening to music, and I'll seek new music out. And I'm not a director, but I'll go to movies and I'll watch TV shows, and I enjoy the art even though I don't practice it myself. And so I think the extent to which an art is healthy depends on how many people consume it outside of maybe the small number of people who produce it.
Yes, I completely
And in that
agree.
way, it's very not as doing not as well as the other art forms.
I completely agree. In fact, that's what I thought about. And Andy, maybe I've mentioned this to you. Is there who's the fan of poetry who is not a poet themselves? And who is that?
You know what?
There
Yeah.
has to be, because there are people that buy into, again, I'm being stereotypical when I say poetry, and then I'm going to say this. There are people that buy into romance. So there's people who are definitely dedicated romance novel readers or rom-com watchers, but they don't necessarily go, I need to go find poetry to read as a part of that experience. So again, who is the poetry fan who is not a poet themselves? That's the question, I think. Exactly. Who is that? That's where I think the music does come in. When you can transition poetry into other medium, or bring that experience like a comedy club. That's why I think and Andy, I'm gonna stop one last second, because this is the last point I got for this, is that if we can combine music, comedy, and poetry or live performance, that might be the all-encompassing powerhouse where we can have that artist revival. Because again, poetry alone will not be enough. It's 8 people that want to hear themselves read their poem and also get involved by getting inspired. I get so inspired by reading poetry, hearing poetry. We get inspired by each other's work. Who is the fan? How do we get them?
Yeah, but that's a good.
I watch comedians and I don't tell jokes. And I'll go to a concert all the time that I still, at 40 years old, I'm down in the not the mosh pit, but I'm on the floor trying to get into the scene because I love it.
You wouldn't go to a mosh pit, wouldn't you?
I would. I'm pretty tough.
AI Firefly said, responding to Robert, perhaps poetry currently only alive for poets. That was a question she had.
Yeah, I would say so. I think that's the conclusion that I've come to. If it is dead in any sense, it's because it's only read by the people who practiced it. And in that sense, it's dead. And I think that's, how maybe an art form collapses in on itself, is when the only people who practice it, like I saw the other day, there just these weird, crazy videos on Instagram or YouTube or Twitter. I can't remember, but it was of horse diving. And there used to be this sport called horse diving, where you would stand with you would ride a horse, and you would be on a diving board, and you would jump with your horse off the diving board into water. And it's wild. If you look at it, you're like, what the heck? It was back in the early 1900s, I think. It was a video. of this horse diving, and it might have even been the Olympics. I don't know if I'm misremembering it, but there's a sport that that does no longer exist, right? It's gone out and it's moved away because it probably shrunk like this. People used to watch it, and then other things came along, and now they watch those, and then only the people who practice horse diving watched horse diving, and then those people eventually dissolved away, and so that's how I think an art dies is when it maybe its viewership collapses in, so that only the people who practice it use it or consume it. I think poetry is at that point right now, and that's not to say it's going to die completely, because I don't think it can, because I think it is connected to language fundamentally, but it is minuscule, and I would say that maybe the answer is not to maybe add other things onto it, like you're saying, Angela. If we add music, if we add like live performances, I've kind of gone in the opposite direction, where I think like what is essential to poetry that makes it valuable as its own art form, as opposed to maybe, appearing in, because there's plenty of works, there's plenty of novels and prose writing that's full of poetry, that's full of poetic language that uses poetry. It also is a part of, screenwriting in movies. You can write poetically. You can write poetic dialogue for movies. You can write poetic lyrics for songs. But is there something that's essential about
poetry then? Because that's just utilizing the expression. So is poetry just the way we write emotionally, and we kind of throw away the rules, or we use really restrictive rules because poetry is more about the feeling than anything else? Is that kind of what I'm asking at this point? Because you're saying I can use poetry in other mediums, and again, what I'm asking, what is poetry? Is it just the expression of emotion?
Well, it's interesting you say that, though. It's funny because as you're talking, it just reminded me, because Robert Sharp was talking about, we see them in movies and stuff like that. And one thing that came to mind was a Tyler Perry movie called For Color Girls, and it was actually based on poems by I believe it was a book called For Color Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Was Not Enough. That's what it's based on, that book. And Tyler Perry did his thing of the movie called For Color Girls, where pretty much let's say, we got into an argument, but then the response is say, I can't stand it more. It becomes a poem. That's the response to the situation. And I would have thought like even that itself would have kind of gave more curiosity to poetry, where like people want to know, what else poetry is out there, so that's something I was thinking about as well while you guys were while Robert was saying what he was just saying. So I don't know, I just found it to be very interesting. So I don't know, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I think I think my definition is something like poetry is the figuration of language. So it's the practice of figuring language, literally like shaping it, and by that extension, like thought. Like it's kind of like the figuration of thought. It's the way of shaping thought so that it can appear into our minds in a clear way, so that we can maybe, visualize concepts, tropes, ideas in a way that makes sense to us. I think that's ultimately what poetry is, and I think the study of poetry would be like the practice of poetry would be, focusing on figurative language, and so I think that if you could have a poetry that is valuable, it's in focusing in on a study of figurative language and how that works, like how something like metaphor works. And I think in poetry, in the purest sense of poetry, of you at home, or not at home, but you writing and getting your thoughts down and using poetic language, it is the practice of figuring language. Does that make sense?
No, that
I don't
makes
have a,
sense. And
I don't have a full
no, it
theory
makes
yet, but
It's
no, but
coming
it's
together.
interesting though, because no, but because I was thinking about that article you had posted that you had responded to, where it says poetry died 100 years ago this month, and this was
Mhm.
what was it, 2000 December 2022. There was an article that came out in the New York Times that says poetry died 100 years ago this month, right? But then I found a section where somebody was responding to that article. There was numerous ones too, but this one I found very interesting. So it says just because. So this is by Matthew Walter was the person that wrote the article. The name of the person that responded, I believe, the person's name was Julian Pryor. I think I can't pronounce the last name. I'm sorry. But it's interesting what it says here. It says, just because poetry is not a popular art form in North America doesn't mean it's dead. If Mr. Walther would look closely, he'd see it thriving in local scenes. Poetry is it's free to change into something Mr. Walther doesn't recognize as good, but it is not free to die. A poem is a process set in motion by a compulsion to sing in the teeth of death. As the world changes, poets change forms, and Mr. Walther has a right to feel shortchanged, but his neglect for everything fabulous that happened since T.S. Eliot finished poetry off is puzzling. For instance, he ignores the influence of Whitman and surrealism on the beast and the impact of French poets like Apollinaire and, I'm sorry, on the I can't pronounce that word. I'm so sorry. Quotidian rhythms of New York poets in the post-war American boom, bypassing it bypassing it all to insist that everyone after Eliot has cursed to rewrite the wasteland. No vision so negative can win. In fact, as a teacher and a poet whose work has been published in this newspaper, I found that our art forms thriving and nearly secret history of struggle and triumph is one of the most lay people want to learn about. And I would guess that many young poets, MFAs or not, are captured by the thrill of becoming part of the story. America today is poetry curious, and it would be wonderful to see more articles in the Times talking about poetry culture with love and humor.
poetry curious, that's a good word. I'm poetry curious.
That was from the New York Times, but that was from January 15th of this year. That was
Yeah.
an opinion article. So yeah, I mean, seriously, I don't know. What do you guys think?
That's very interesting observation that the person. I mean, it's like we could agree to disagree, but I definitely think poetry comes in different shapes and form. One thing you did say, I think poetry is not dying. I don't think it can die. I think personally, based on what we've been talking about, I think it's all about interest at the end of the day, whether you like it and you're interested in it or you're not. That's how I see it. I mean, I love poetry, but because I get my inspirations from music and then from books, right? But it's mostly more music because that's what I grew up on. I always grew up on I've always grew up on music, so anything I heard would come into this idea or something like that. And then books just came a little bit later because I would go to school or people would, hey, check out like Catcher in the Rye, for example. That's actually one of my favorite books, actually. And I got a lot of inspiration just from that book alone. But that came a little bit later, But again, I think it comes in different shapes and forms because I think without that differentness behind it, I don't know. But I don't think it's dying. I mean, do I feel like it's become diluted in such a stupid way? Maybe, because I was having a conversation with someone earlier about how, let's say, if you write a sentence, automatically it's a micro poem, and it's just like, it's not a micro word, it's just a sentence. You know what I'm saying? So this whole thing, and then they've created something that I don't think ever existed. there's all these different types of poetry they say. So I don't know. I definitely say it comes differently, it shows up differently, and I think that's okay. But again, I think it's all based on interest, in my opinion.
And I'm going to say two things. I'm going to say, first of all, I think poetry will never die when it comes to if it's needed for a movement or a moment. So poetry's always been there when we have been in crisis, and a lot of times poetry has come for people to express real generational trauma and grieving, and
this is true.
A place for that.
This is true.
However, I will say poetry is dying because of the AI movement. Robert Charbonneau, what do you think of ChatGPT?
That's good. That's
English
good, though.
Teacher, ChatGPT. Students can turn in papers to you right now. They just need to type in a few things. It's happening now. We talked about it for a moment. You can write poetry. It's killing the art community. What do you think?
But that's interesting because
Robert, hold on, Andy.
Hold on. But I need to.
Robert, shut it up.
No, but I'm good. Wait, I just have to make up this point. You said about movement. That's true because it happened with Allen Ginsberg days, right? But during Black Lives Matter, there was poetry that came out. There was during that time that people were. As a matter of fact, there's a few poets I follow that kind of outside of our circle, but different type of circle. But they actually were there and they were reciting poetry in the middle of the crowd. Like there's articles about that. So it's interesting you brought that up. Now, as far as AI, I don't know. I'm still trying to understand.
Robert,
so go ahead. No. So that's what I wanted to say. Yeah. So now, with that being said, now go ahead, Robert. Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to bring that up least before I forget.
Appreciate you because we can get into that too for sure. But Robert.
And ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. We had our poetry unit. We had a poetry unit at the beginning of the second semester. So it just got done like a few weeks ago. And I failed a bunch of students because they had used ChatGPT to write their poems for them.
Mm-hmm,
and I could tell that they had used ChatGPT because ChatGPT is really terrible with writing poetry. Like prose, it can do really well right now,
articles,
but poetry,
academic papers, pretty decent too. I think I've seen kids try to throw those in.
Yeah,
so, Leon, we're happy you're here.
Yeah, glad.
You're saying so ChatGPT poetry.
Oh, that's the other co-host. What's up, guys?
For now, though. For now, because it's always an evolutionary moment. So as more poetry continues to be out there, perhaps ChatGPT gets better at poetry.
Well, you would think that it would be able to be good at poetry because there's as much poetry as there is, prose that it can draw from. Right. But it's strange that it's very easy to tell when it's written a poem as opposed to when it's written prose. And I think there was some article, I saw some headline in the Times about making that point. But yeah, it's really interesting that it's very easy to tell when it wrote the students' poems. And whereas, other work, they've probably slipped by with some other work because it is really indistinguishable. And, I'm still working through how to incorporate it in a way that I find useful because I actually find it really useful myself, and I use it.
You can do lesson plans on it.
It could do, lesson plans. I haven't used it for lesson plans, but I like to talk.
It at all. I got my own shit in my own head I got to deal with, so I don't have time for AI.
I'll use it for it's really good for like generating, like we'll have vocab words and I'll be like, generate me some fill in the blank sentences that use these vocab words, and that saves me a lot of time than having to like think of the sentence itself. It's useful.
It can be. I mean, again, technology can be.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just don't know how to incorporate it in a way so that they're using it and they're asking the right questions and they're not just asking it to give them an answer. They're asking it in order to find out an answer.
Right.
Like I think that way it could be really useful.
And well, first let me introduce myself. Sorry I'm late. I'm Leon, as Andy had forced it. Andy and Angela stated. I'm the other co-host. Nice to meet you. And I wanted to chime in on what I thought about the Chat GPT. It definitely is a new frontier, especially when it comes to writing and everything. And to me, it's almost like, in a way, how the calculator was when it came to mathematics. It just made things a whole lot more easier. But then at the same time, in a way, it can make us more lazy as well, because like, oh, I don't need to think. I just have my AI do it. I mean, ChatGPT can just do it. All right. I mean, I don't need to, like, I don't need to really, like, do that much critical thinking. And to me, that's a detriment. Now, you had said something about how it's not good at producing poetry, and I guess my theory on that is the AI hasn't become that advanced yet, to a point. But also, I think it's because, like, this about poetry, how it just flows from, like, the consciousness of a person, and so far I think AI really can't duplicate that or replicate that, if you will. Would you say the same?
Yeah, I think there's, and good to meet you too. What's your name? What was it again?
Living Canvas Poetry, but you can call me Leon.
Leon. Okay, Leon. Yeah. There's something about poetry that ChatGPT doesn't seem to be able to do, and the things that it does do with poetry are maybe not they're like the easy, the simple things. Like it knows how to rhyme, and I think that tells us something about poetry, and I think it has to do with the fact that a lot of maybe what goes on in poetry is implied rather than explicitly stated, and the algorithm is not able to understand what's implied in maybe the movement between lines. And there's a guy who said something like, I think it was Harold Bloom, who said most of poetry proceeds from ellipsis, and ellipsis is like what you leave out of the poem. And so, like, maybe the jump that happens between one line and the next line, there's a gap, like something has been left out in the voice of the poem, and the reader is the person who's filling that in, and the ChatGPT can't fill that in. And so I think that, yeah, it's missing something, and maybe it's the way in which poetry is written, in that it leaves things out. Yeah.
No, I mean, I really get what you're saying. It does make sense, and that's what I'm saying. I believe the complexity of the human mind, because usually AI, when it thinks, it's always thinking to, like, logic and statistics and what have you. And when it comes to the human consciousness, it's something that just cannot be duplicated or replicated. I said replicated as easily as one may think.
Yeah, I don't think that I mean, it's getting better. Who knows if it will eventually be able to do that? I think there's something ephemeral in our consciousness that I don't think that ChatGPT can replicate.
Mm-hmm.
And I think poetry is a good example. And I think it's partly because poetry is so maybe closely connected with thinking itself. And so when you ask ChatGPT to write poetry and it can't do it, I think it's because it's not actually thinking, and it's not conscious in the ways that we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sean. They call me also Eligio Abram on Instagram. I love what you guys are saying, because you're right. AI can't get the understanding, because usually poetry is like a hidden meaning within a meaning. And that's the reason why the machine will not get it, because you have to understand we're taking old stuff and reincorporating it. Like our description, instead of saying the color red, we might describe it through a rouge color on her cheek. And then they'll use that as inform. And then the double entendre on top of that is they'll take that and put it into poetry. Instead of saying the color red, they'll say, well, it's the time when her cheeks was slapped. And that was the color, how he felt inside. Hey, I don't understand that, because you just took something from the old and you just did a description from it. So people who understand the old meaning, they understand what you're talking about. A slap on a person's face, their face usually turned red, and that's what they meant by the thing, and that's how the person felt inside. So he basically, when you do poetry, you just took that and you just painted a picture, but people that don't have understanding of the old talking about the meaning of that, they won't get it. And AI don't know what it's talking about because they don't know where to pull it from, where to pull the thought from, because people who experience it, they know, yeah, when you get the cheek, your face turns red. And that's how he felt inside. And so therefore the description of it becomes more, so people that get it, they get it. And the other people that don't get it, they don't get it. But later on when they look back, they have learned, what word means and how description things is, they'll understand, like, oh my goodness, that's what that meant?
Yeah.
Wow. And that makes it so exciting.
Things and idioms and archaic meanings that no longer in use. Oh, did you want to say something, Angela? Oh, you're on mute. You are on mute.
Oh. Remember that book? It was called Tales of Two Cities? That was one of I think that was great poetry in there because there was so many, it had double meanings and people didn't understand it. And so when I had that explained to me, I was like, wow, that is really a really, really good book. Most people, they wouldn't understand it, but when you start getting into the English language or the way people speak from the way people write, that book captures it in a way. What do you think?
I was
Robert?
muted. Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to say. You're on mute.
Go ahead.
All I was
Maybe
saying,
let Angela.
all I was saying was I want to hear from Robert and Leon about what you thought about what you just said. So I didn't say anything else.
That's what I was
Thank you, Andy.
God.
All I was doing was just tossing the conversation like the moderator would. That's all.
Oh, okay.
I do want to say this too, though, in the chat that Word Player Muse here also just commented that I don't think poetry as an art form is dying. I just think there is so much infiltration in the virtual visual arts into the population that it's taken actually a back seat. So do you guys, one, I want to hear more about the fact that the computer doesn't understand that there's the double meaning. Or also, this is actually Robert Charbonneau, what is the book that really your students go, holy moly, this is really what's going on?
A book that they really enjoy. I think that they end up liking all of the books.
Brave New World for me, my Brit Lit class, like, oh my gosh, I freaking love Brave New World. Aldous Huxley. I loved it. Like, that was such a great book. Like, Catcher in the Rye, of course, is like one that people talk about. That's the book that woke me up. What's the book that wakes your students up?
Did you say that wakes them up, or that's what woke you up when you were in high school?
I'm asking, what books wakes your students up? Do you have a book that you like to teach that wakes them up? And to like, whoa, this is a world out there.
I love teaching. I teach. We'll read Kurt Vonnegut, Slaughterhouse-Five. We do some Shakespeare, some Julius Caesar. We do The Awakening by Kate Chopin, and we did The Plague when COVID hit. That was really fun to draw some parallels between what was happening in real life and what was happening in the book. And they seemed to really, they didn't seem like they liked it at the time, but then when I asked them to vote on which book they liked the best at the end of the year, they voted for that one. And they will still come back and talk to me about that one, which I found was very strange. I find it to figure out what it is that they actually like, because, sometimes it takes them a while but it sticks with them, and so then they'll like come back to me the next year or the next 2 years and they'll talk about that book again, and I'm like, oh, it didn't seem like you enjoyed that book at all, or you didn't mention anything about it when we were talking about it. And some books I feel like they're like a delayed release, and so they hit you like later in like a couple of years. Poetry, I found they really like poetry, and maybe that is just because of my passion for it.
So what poetry do they really get into then?
Gosh, what do we look at this year? We do like new stuff every year just to try out new stuff because I'm like a new teacher. And this year we did a lot of Dickinson, which they really liked. They really liked Emily Dickinson. What else did we do? We looked at some Blake. We looked at some Wordsworth. I kind of structured the class based on like different forms. And so we'll look at different maybe types of poems. Like we'll spend a week on like haiku, and then we'll spend a week on like odes, or then we'll spend a week on sonnets. And so within those forms, we cover a bunch of different poets to see how they're working with the forms. And I find that a good way to go about it. But yeah, they really spawned Dickinson. They did not like, who was the guy who just died recently? There's a poet who died.
There's a poet who died not so long ago. And I can't remember who it was.
To me,
and
yeah.
Right.
To me, I feel like
it wasn't Seamus Haney, but I think that I want to say that it's Seamus Haney, but it's not, and I don't know why. Who was it? Let's see. Wild.
They did not like this person.
No, they did not.
When I was teaching like little
So
kids,
not only did this
when I was teaching
person
little
die,
kids,
but they didn't like them either. So
I would
maybe
poetry
it's
back to
okay
like
that we don't remember who it
nursery
was.
rhymes.
Back to nursery rhyme. Yeah, we do.
Like Dr.
We do ballads.
They love that because a lot of rappers you're using Dr. Seuss mind. Like you know what? They love that because that's what you grab the young attention because that's what they first brought up with. Mother Goose. Those type of nursery rhymes, you go back to old school like that, so you can pull from there because there was a lot of rhymes and a lot of poetry in that stuff, and they would relate to that really quickly. And that's what I find when I work with little kids. I'm gonna work with teenagers now because they go back to their childhood and you pull from that, and then they're like, oh, I get it. I have a nursery rhyme, and then that's what they get there because a lot of kids they're into rap and they're into music, and so when they pull from those old nursery rhymes, especially when the new rappers reinforce those old rhymes, they're like, oh, I know that. What was that one song that was really famous about? I'm not sure if it was Dr. Seuss, but he was talking about it was really big back like years ago. It was really big because the rapper used that in his rhymes about walk it like you talk it, walk it like you talk it. It was really big on that. It was like so huge.
So for
No,
me,
I don't know that one.
Yeah, it came out like over 10 years ago now. Well over 10.
Yeah.
But for me, what I think books for me in school that really drew me, Macbeth. I'm in love with this. That story just hit me, and I remember like when I was in stories, I was that one kid who would get very animated whenever the teacher was like, I want you to play a role of, and that's what we would do. So we would read, like, you had to read and put yourself into the character. So I was just so animated, playing like two of the characters and everything. Another book, it's not a poetry, but it's another book that really touched my heart, The Red Badge of Courage.
I remember that.
That's another one that really, I love that one. I could always go back to that one.
That's great. I mean, those books really. What about that one though, Leon? What about that one really got you?
But the Red Badge of Courage.
If you don't mind.
Yeah. I think what got me the Red Badge of Courage was just the bravery and the resilience that the main character had, and the love that he had for his like friends in the midst of the battlefield. How, there was, in the midst of impending doom that was around all of them, is like that he found a way to, have to try to have camaraderie and everything in the midst of him being like under all of this extreme pressure. And that's why I really loved. And I feel like the book, the way it was written, you really get in tune with the different personalities of that book. I'm like, and I love a book that you can read it and it kind of just transports you to that place where you're just reading it and you just want to learn more. You want to learn not just about the characters, you want to learn more about the landscape. You want to learn more about what they're thinking internally. You want to know, hey, maybe we can get some background on, families, things like that. And so I love that. When it comes to poetry, what I love about poetry is whether it was written yesterday, whether it's written 100 or thousands of years ago, poetry can pull your heartstrings in a way where you can feel the exact same way that author did, no matter how long ago, and you're able to relate and put yourself into that very poem. And like, wow, that's exactly what I feel at this moment or in this time. And it's just universal language, and it's quite incredible. And that's why poetry is
like, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds
and that's
like
why I feel like
going...
Go ahead.
No, you finish, Leon.
Okay, and that's why I feel like poetry, it may feel like it's dwindling down, but I don't really think poetry can ever truly die, because if you think about the thousands upon thousands of years it has endured, has gone through multiple transformations and transitions through different, multiple styles, and I think poetry is always on its way of evolution, so
Yeah, I think. Do you think that something that lasts long, a piece of writing that has the ability to last longer and endure through generations, is maybe a quality that make great piece of literature?
Of course, I think so.
Yeah, I think so. And it also depends on the audience as well, because poetry can be objective. There's like, this is the greatest piece of literature ever written by mankind in existence. And there's other people who like, they completely loathe it and dislike it. So I believe that's the beauty part about poetry. It can be objective, but at the end of the day, there still is some appreciation by other people.
Yeah, I think.
Well, I was going to say that it was kind of connecting back to what you were saying before, Robert, that poetry, really, if we could define it is all about the literary experience. That's kind of what I took from Lance. The experience, the word, the language, the use of it, and how we can twist around the wording, and how that's what I'm saying. I think Lance was connecting it all back throughout what we had been discussing earlier. That's all I was trying to say. I am going to say something controversial, though.
What's that?
Ready for it? I know that you spoke on this on one of your other discussions on a similar topic, but I did want to say really quickly, though, on Friday, we are going to be having our guest over here in the corner join us on Friday for our open mic and discussion for the first hour. So on Friday, he'll be joining us. But before I kick him out, I do want you to be a part of this real quick controversial topic that, Robert, I know you had spoken on before. I am gonna say this, that I think there has been a decline of reading. That people are not reading as much as they are. Now, there are people who will, and there are people who read extensively and for duration and have the endurance and do. But I'm going to say, overall, I think people are not reading. So that's the conversation I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah, I don't maybe I don't think it's a controversial statement at all. I think it's true that like people
Very.
don't read as much as they have it.
I said that you disagreed with that. I thought I heard you say that before in one of your other. I was reviewing some of your older conversations on this topic, and you had said that you thought that people were reading. Maybe it was an older comment. So you think people are not reading as much anymore?
No, they're definitely not reading as much as they used to. And I think I had some stats for that. I was quoting some study that was done a few years ago about the amount of people who have bought a book or read a book of poetry. Mm-hmm. And yeah, people definitely don't read as much as they used to anymore because there are other, forms of art. I think that means that it's worth asking, is there something still valuable about reading that's worth preserving? I think that extends into the question of poetry too. Is there something about poetry that's worth preserving or worth seeking out when you have all these other forms of art? Like, why would you? I think it's a genuine question why you would read as opposed to maybe just go see a movie, or why you would even read a book. Why you would read a poem when you could just read a book? I think it's worth thinking about.
Why.
Yeah.
Because
why?
the movie is never as good as the book. Ever.
Yes.
You gotta read the book.
Yes.
Why is it? Why isn't it as good as the book? I think
because you can't. Because in a book, there are so many. I think Elijah Abraham maybe even mentioned it before when he was describing the fact that a smack on the face isn't just a smack across the face in a book. You really get into not only the physical sensation but the emotional sensation and these other bits and pieces along the way that led up to that moment of a simple slap across the face. In a visual experience of just watching a movie, you're not necessarily engaging in all of those microcosmic portions that the word, the language, the description seems to lend itself to.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't remember. Gosh, it's gonna kill me. I have to look it up because I spent the time to read a 697 page book of a movie that Michael Cera was the main character. I'll look it up while you guys are chatting about it, but. I wanted to read the book to see if the movie was anything good, and it was so bad I couldn't even believe it. But I loved it so much.
The book was? Or the movie was?
The movie was terrible. The book was so freaking good.
Saves the world. Something saves the world.
No. It's not Scott Pilgrim because that's a graphic novel. This was a huge book. I am. Okay. And then
yeah, I agree with you.
Andy back, but before I can do that,
okay.
Elijah, do you have any last thoughts or anything before I kick you out?
Yeah, my last thoughts was more of the days the education level in the school is not as good, so they're not really focused, so they're teaching the children other things.
You're talking to two teachers tonight.
I know, but y'all know.
It's true though.
But so kids nowadays they're like on their phone and they forgetting how to spell stuff because they're always using that they write emojis and stuff like that, so they don't know how to write, and they definitely don't know how to read that well, so they're not reading books, because if they were, their language would be a lot better, but it's not. It's getting worse because it's broken sentence, so people are not reading books. But those artists that they follow, those artists that they like, are reading the books of poetry, are getting their information from the poetry, doing the research to get that, so they go back into poetry. So the people that they idolize is doing the work, but the people that are actually listening to it are appreciating the work, but they're not doing it themselves. That's the problem we have. They're not pushing the knowledge themselves. They'd just rather watch a movie, and the movie doesn't capture, like you said, the movie does not capture the whole entire thing. If you read a book, it's like when you read the book of Harry Potter, the stories, it's a lot better than the movie, because the book covered so many different angles that they couldn't put it all in the movie. Right. And a movie, they cut things down so they can fit into the screen. So they miss out on the great quality of it, and they only capture just the small little quick corpse of the movie, and they miss out on the details. What do you think?
I have to agree. That's like reading a book, or reading them, and that You catch the nuances, the small little nuances, and not only that, but when you're reading the book, your creativity more, because when you read it, it feels personal. You know, it feels personal rather than just like watching a movie and seeing like someone else's vision. But like when you're reading the book, even though another author wrote it, like you can envision. It's like you can envision.
Like it resonates with you differently in opposed to how it resonates with you in the movie. Let's say, for example, like I get what you're saying too, because I definitely agree with that. I don't want to say I wonder why that is. Rather, I think what I'm really want to say is I find it interesting that it's more intimate. It's like when I like you and me particularly, Leon, because we do read the Bible, and there's a lot of poetry in the Bible too. And it's interesting how certain aspects of I'm always going to mention Ecclesiastes. That's actually one of my favorite books in that Bible, because it resonates with me in the way like, okay, he's glorifying God, but then he's also saying, well, at the end of the day, all this is it's meaningless at the end of the day, because it's all gonna come to an end and we ain't gonna live here no more. It's like, this is good, but this is also bad. I'm like, wait, but why do you say that? You just contradicted yourself. You say God is glorious, but yet you're also scared of him too. And it's like, wait, what happened here? You know, and but it resonates with me in that way, because I'm like, wait, when I read it, I'm the kind of guy, like when I'm reading something, whether it's that or a piece, I put myself in the situation as if I'm the one living that situation. So I can have an understanding where I'm like, oh, okay, maybe I'm not understanding the situation how he understood it, but it helped me understand in a way that, oh, wait, even though I never went go through this. Mm-hmm. You'd be surprised. There has been some stuff that I've read in the past where I'm like, wait, I actually went through this. Or let's say, oh, I haven't gone through it yet, but when I do go through it, I don't want to say, oh, I'm in a piece. Rather, it's going to remind me of certain things of that piece or that thing or that article I read that made me remember that, if that makes sense. It's interesting to do, because I've had conversations with people that, let's say we're having a conversation right now, but then it will remind me of something I read from a long time ago. Let's say, for example, and I think that's why the difference between reading and opposed to like watching something in a movie, let's say, I feel like you could kind of capture the same, but it's not as intimate in the same way, in opposed to actually reading
I completely agree, Andy. I think you're right. When you're reading the book, you're going through that cognitive frontal lobe is really activating, because you're processing the language with multiple areas of your linguistic side of your brain, and also you're connecting it to things that you've experienced in your life or emotions you felt in your own experience. Robert Sharman, what do you think about that? Also, however, I do need to correct a few things. I did find it was Youth in Revolt. C.D. Payne is the author. It wasn't 600 pages. It was only 498 pages. I'm sorry, it was not 600. It was only 498, but it was incredible. It's about Nicholas Twist and his whole experience, but the movie sucked. And I liked Michael Cera as an actor, but that book, it was so freaking good.
Oh my God.
Robert Sharman, what do you think about reading versus the movie experience?
Yeah, I think you're all like touching on I think one of probably the main differences, like when you're reading a book, you're engaging in the same way in which you normally have a conversation with yourself in your head. So we all have a voice in our head, our consciousness that's just talking to us, and we can have conversations with it. And then reading a book, the solitary act of reading a book when you're sitting down is the book is kind of not doing the thinking for you, but it's using the same train of thought that you have when you're thinking, which is a very active thing, as opposed to maybe sitting and watching a movie, which is a very passive thing, and the images are coming at you. And so that's maybe why it does feel more intimate to read rather than to watch a movie, is because when we're reading, we're hearing the thought, we're hearing the words in our head as we're reading it. So the words are in our head; they've become our train of thought. Whereas maybe when you're watching a movie, maybe you have a thought when you're watching a movie about the movie. you'd be like, oh, I see that they're doing that, or oh, I see that they're doing that. But when you're engaged in reading and like the solitary act of reading, your thoughts are the same thing as the thing that you're reading in the book, and there's just such a closer there's such a closer relationship between the book and you than maybe the book and the movie.
Sorry, you guys see me wagging my hand, and that's my way of letting you know that I'm really passionate. I have a question for you, because this is the question I've had. Because, as you guys know, I'm an intervention specialist, which, if you don't know, that's a special education teacher, which is a student for people who are different abled learners, or traditionally you've learned them as students with disabilities. Is reading the act of reading silently to yourself, or is being able to listen to an audiobook consider reading? The reason I'm asking that is in the state of Ohio, we have a reading test. And you can listen to any other test in the state of Ohio, whether it's a science test, an American history test, a government test, math test, you can even listen to it. But if it's a reading test, it's strictly only just, visual. Now, obviously, there are students who still require access to audio, because, students who've been diagnosed with dyslexia, that is something that is, more severe, that they cannot just try and practice a few times. They have a legit difference when they're looking at letter combinations sometimes. Symbol, is reading only to itself, or is audio considered reading? Robert, as an English teacher,
that's good. That is good.
Because again,
that
I
is
think that
good.
I want to know, because they're testing reading comprehension. Is that a part of reading comprehension?
That's good. Wow.
I want to say, so for somebody who has ADHD, and I don't know, for some reason I feel like as I get older, it could be because brain synapse, social media scrolling and everything, but sometimes I feel it harder to concentrate and read, even though I still love reading. I've always loved reading. But when I'm listening to it on audio, I still feel like my brain is still receiving it. Because sometimes I don't want to sit back and read it. Sometimes I just want to listen. And I feel like it still can put your brain in this kind of meditative state where you're still receiving the information. And then, if you miss something, you can always, slow the speed down, or sometimes rewind and go back so you can receive the information. And I still think it as reading, because I feel like your brain is still receiving it the same way as if your eyes were looking at the words, and receiving it.
Yeah, I think I would I think I would disagree. I think that they are different. But I don't think that there's anything wrong with them being different. I love listening to audiobooks, and sometimes I enjoy that maybe better than reading for certain books.
I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for this, because I have a theory, and I want to know you finish your thought, because you're the expert. Honestly, you are the expert as the English. Your master's is in English, not in education. I understand that. My master's is not technically in education either. I have a psychology degree, and then I have a master's in special education with licensure. So I'm in the same kind of boat that you are, Robert Charbonneau. But I tend to want to believe that fluency and comprehension, we can maybe potentially split into two separate categories. But I want to hear from you, because you're the actual expert. You're the one who actually has the degree in English, and perhaps can actually shed a light to why you are saying they are different.
Well, yeah, I'm probably not. I think you would probably want to get a neuroscientist in there to figure that out. What parts of the brain are being activated when you're reading silently to yourself as opposed to when you're listening. I just think from my experience, where there is a difference between solitary reading when you're just reading by yourself in your own mind, and then having something spoken to you. It's different because you're using your own voice in your head when you're reading something on the page by yourself, and that's, I think, fundamentally different than having something spoken to you. I just think it's a different experience. It affects me differently. It affects me differently sometimes the same book, like what I've been reading recently, like the Idols of the King by Tennyson, is a series of longer narrative poems by Tennyson about some of the Arthurian legends, and I've read it solitary, like by myself, quietly, and then I've also listened to it because there's this great voice actor who did it on Audible, and I think it's a different experience both times. Yeah. But they're both valuable. I think that in any way that you can get it, literature, you should get it, and I think they both maybe do different things for you, and I think that they're both valuable.
That's wonderful. I just want to say hi to a guest of ours that had joined us. I had met this gentleman, Frizzy, during my Nashville, and I had spoken about what you had brought up earlier. So I don't know if he's available to jump in and talk about the students that came out and visited with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to request and see if he's available to join us, because we're talking about whether or not poetry is dead. We've been talking about that for quite a bit with our guests. Okay, not in a good space. That's okay. But we did want to talk about. That's okay.
Never mind, Leon. You can come back.
Leon back. Just the reason I wanted to see if you could talk on that, because we were talking about whether or not poetry is dead or not, and I had spoken to some students earlier, asked them whether or not they thought poetry was alive or dead. And when I met with Frizzy, we spoke about some of our students, or my students, and a lot of them said yes, that was dead because it's not the same way, or no, it's not dead because we still utilize it. So I'm just so happy you were able to join us either way. So I'm gonna try and get our friend Leon back, and unless anybody else out there wanted to join in on the conversation with us, again, just go ahead and request that. I'll bring Leon in while we continue that conversation. Oh, well, yeah, you can't come in while you're driving.
It's interesting. Okay. I just wanted to read something that was said earlier, because I think about poetry that I thought was very interesting. This from World Player Muse. So when COVID happened, there was suddenly a lot of time and a lot of fear, and poetry offered people a means of overcoming chaos. I witnessed the growth in interest. It was great. And I believe what else? She said something else after that. Hold on. She also said, so people are reading, but definitely reading. The purpose stands to question, though. Times are rapidly changing, is what she said. And she also says, why would anyone read? Why would they get visual gratification without the effort? Okay, so as far as 2020 was a very interesting time, because I feel like this goes back to what I said in the very beginning about Allen Ginsberg and the lasting impact. There is possible change for it to go back to something like that. And I think 2020 was a perfect example of that, because there was, for the least 5-6 months that we were on the lockdown, there was some form of a renaissance that happened during that time, because everybody was going live. Everybody, and I mean everybody, like, it's because of that 2020 thing. I found the communities I never even heard of. I interacted with people I never even knew existed from all around the world, that during the daytime, I didn't know this was happening, and now we started following each other. And there was, although we were in different parts of the world, but one thing I can honestly say we all had in common is the fact that we all had that one common bond, and it was to share poetry, is to comfort each other during these hard times, because we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know, because where I was at, like, especially, like, let's say if I had to go visit my mom, it was pretty difficult, because I live in New Jersey. My mom lived in New York, and just getting to New York was pretty difficult, because after a certain time, the trains weren't running, or I had to leave at a certain time to get back home. And there was all these restrictions that were going on. Like, pretty much when I went to, because I had to go through Times Square just to go to, take the train, because the usual routes that I would take I wasn't able to take the usual routes. And I found it interesting. Like, I've never seen Times Square such a dead zone the way I did that day. And during that time. And to me, that was scary because it gave me a sense of, what's that word? It gave me a sense of, oh my God. I can't find the word, but it just gave me that perspective, I guess. That's like, whoa, wait, this life. What if life really gets like that? And then what are we gonna have left? And I feel like during that time of fear, there was that time of comfort, and I feel like poetry definitely did that during the Instagram days. And I feel like if that's the case, right? And also, Black Lives Matter happened, and there was poetry a whole lot because of that. And like I said earlier, I know poets that are not really in our circle, but I follow them that they actually went to those rallies and recited poetry out loud. That I remember there's one girl I follow, her name was Erica Martin. She was in the middle of a crowd. I think it was Junior Square. I forgot what part of, because there was different ones, but the one she was at, she just started hugging people. Everybody started hugging each other. And it's like there was another one, Leah James, who just went on top of a thing and just started reciting poetry. It's like, again, those things happen, but I feel like that form of words and you know, again, even though in the midst of chaos, those things brought comfort. And I feel like in that same way that happened, that's what happened in the 50s and the 60s too, because the Beat Generation wasn't for the hippies era. So it just makes me wonder, like, I don't think it's dead. I feel like there's a chance for changing that aspect, if that makes sense. I really believe in my heart that we can have this form of impact. I mean, why not? Like, why can it be? You know, and I think what I just mentioned were actual examples of that. Now, the crazy thing about that time, yes, we did see a lot of people's true colors that time, but even in the midst of all that, there was still poetry being in you know, a source of comfort. And it's interesting too because I noticed I started to see a lot of more believers too in that time that were coming out and that were talking about God and talking about Jesus and reading poetry related to that. So it's like poetry came in so many forms that it gave that comfort for that 2020, 2021. And I feel like once the algorithm changed in late 2021 to 2022, I think somehow, some way, everything got distorted in that aspect. But I definitely believe, I don't think poetry's dead. I think I feel like civilization is claiming that it's dying or it's claiming to be dead. It's just like what they said in the article, just because you don't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So, I mean, that's, I don't know. I just came into this whole tangent. I am so sorry, God. But I don't know. That's just how I got. That's what I got.
Poetry never dies. Poetry never dies. That's what a lot of the adults said. That's what a lot of the. Well, actually, that's not true.
So what?
Andy, that's not true. There were. Hold on. Let me get some fake but accurate data because I did that.
No, wait. No. What's not true? That poetry's dying, or what I said wasn't true?
Not every adult said that poetry was alive. There were plenty of adults that said poetry was dead. I had 1, 2, 3.
I don't think it's dying. I just think it needs a redirection.
I'm just saying. I said all the adults said that, but I wanted to be.
No, yeah. But you get what I'm saying, though. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I think it just needs to be redirection and re-inspired. I think. Like I was saying earlier too about like music, I feel like music has tried to desecrate poetry when it shouldn't have, because I feel like even though they use that in music, it's not the only way or it's not the only thing when it comes to writing. Marcus Smith, that's funny because he did show up here earlier. I don't see him now, but I remember he said something on one of your lives. He said, we need less poets and more writers. I believe he said something to that magnitude. I just wanted your guys' opinion on that because it just came to mind now as I was saying that. And I know I went to a tangent. I'm sorry, guys, but I wanted your opinion
Andy,
on all these things.
Nobody goes on a tangent more than I do, Andy. You're good. You're good, Andy.
What do you think, Robert?
That doesn't sound like something Marcus would say. But
Yeah, I gotta revisit that live again. I think he says something like that. We need more writers, or I gotta revisit that again because he did say something to that magnitude.
Too, because I heard something backwards that I accused Robert of saying. I said said people are reading, and he said people are not reading.
People aren't reading now.
But you said that there were people. I swear to God, I gotta find that clip and I'll send it to you. Where I heard you say, people are saying people are not reading, but actually there are people that are reading. There are people that are reading a lot. I remember you saying that, but maybe it was out of context. Maybe I missed something that connected you to saying, no, actually people aren't. So maybe I missed that.
Yeah.
Well, Quillkeeper says like a revival. I'm like, yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's there. Just I feel like some force is trying to stop it, I guess. I don't know. I'm sorry, Robert.
Robert, what do you
I'm so sorry.
No, you're fine. What are we talking about? What's the topic? Are we back to Poetry's Dead?
Yeah.
I thought we just basically said that Robert, what did we say? I think we did come to a consensus in general.
Yeah, I think poetry is it's dead in the sense that it is not maybe as respected an art form as other art forms today. But I don't think that it will ever go away, maybe like a lot of other art forms have, because it is intimately connected to the way in which we think and consciousness itself, because it gives us the tools to help us visualize our thoughts, which is a useful tool to have. So yeah, I don't think it's ever going away, but definitely as an art form, languishing. And I think that there are probably a bunch of different reasons for that.
Well, what's your reasons for that? Do you think Instagram killed it?
No,
that's a good one.
Yes. Or Instagram is not the poetry medium. It's poetry cannot live here. Poetry
I think
can be shared here. Poetry can be stored here. I dump all my poetry here for no reason. It's like my virtual trash can here. But
I feel like
what I want to say is I am not receiving as much enriched poetry through my experience through here. I get ads. I get too many things that are connected to the advertisement piece, the business of Instagram. So that's why I say Instagram poetry cannot live here. Poetry can be stored here, but poetry should not live here or be loved here. It can be discussed
But
here.
it's interesting.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you said that, because I remember I'm gonna go back to 2010. There used to be platforms that wasn't Instagram, that you were able to post poetry, right? There was Bebo, there was all these things. There was as a matter of fact, when people had MySpace, there was a section that you could put a blog in, and there was no algorithm. So let's say if you had 20 friends, all 20 friends saw your post. Let's say, for example, there was no algorithm back then. There was no limitations back then. So with that being said, I feel like there was more platforms back then. There was also, I don't know if it exists anymore, it's called a writer's cafe. I don't know if that even exists anymore, but there was all these stuff that you were able to do, like post poetry, and people could engage, even though it was like like algorithm wasn't even thought about back then. But it's very interesting, a lot of those particular platforms don't exist anymore. Even Facebook used to have a section where you could write, they call them notes, but that doesn't exist anymore either. And I always wondered, is it really that Instagram's the only place to really get that though? Like, because it's all videos, and now it seems like everything is reels.
I'm going to interrupt you and hear from Robert. Robert, why do you say poetry is dying? And that doesn't necessarily be Instagram focused, but you said that you had some potential, real thought out descriptions as to why.
Yeah, I think there's let's see, there's other mediums of arts that are easier to digest, and they require less effort and less like literacy. So like movies and television is it's a lower threshold entry for audiences. So I think that definitely plays a part. I also think that the art form, like a lot of art forms, kind of evolve and they change over time as they try to maybe do different things. And poetry did seem to come to this kind of like apex with maybe modernism, in the same way that kind of maybe Joyce is seen as like taking the novel as far as you could possibly take it technically. I think Eliot did take poetry maybe as far as he could, and now it's kind of in this weird kind of abstract. It's concerned with abstract maybe techniques, and so it's less relatable to people. In the same way that like visual art has changed over time to being purely representative, to becoming more and more abstract over time, and that turns people off, I think. So I think the direction that the art has gone is maybe a direction that people are not as interested in.
My shit. Sorry, I love abstract.
What's that?
I said abstract's my shit. No, all abstract.
Yeah, there's
all abstract.
Are we talking about visual art or poetry?
Well, both.
See, I have a problem with wait,
what?
I like visual. What's that?
You cut out when you were talking about you have a problem. I'm like, you have a problem with what?
I have a problem with poetry when it becomes so highly abstract and subjective that I can't connect with any of its metaphors or its ideas that it's trying to get across. And it seems to not even.
You can describe. I'm sorry. Can you name a piece that you would say is too abstract for your able to digest it or enjoy it?
I would say
on the spot like that.
I would say a lot of this, maybe the surrealist movement. I think Dadaism is maybe the most extreme form of that.
Okay.
Which kind of leans into this idea of nonsense and kind of destroying any meaning that you can get. Like, I'm not a big fan of maybe Gertrude Stein. I think she veers off too much for my taste sometimes. Most of the time. The surrealists.
You can be real here.
Yeah, I think the surrealists do it. They've maybe taken the form to the point of maybe losing the thread with their audience. And that's happened ever since maybe like 30s onwards, 1930s, 40s onwards. And you see that in, I think visual art is maybe easier to see that happening in. I love abstract expressionism too. I think there's a lot there, and I like Rothko, and I think there's a lot you can get out of it, but you really have to work at it, and you kind of understand enough of the history of art that you understand why they're doing what they're doing, and that can turn people off. Which I think is another point. Is I think we kind of have lost the thread of maybe tradition, the tradition of the art form, and I think when you lose the tradition of your art form, you also lose the art itself. What's that?
Can you define the tradition of our art form? How would you describe the tradition of the poetry art form specifically?
Well,
I like how you said that. I think you said it very well. But what would you describe as this tradition?
The literary canon, going back to Homer in the West, and I think we've gotten away from, for various reasons, we've gotten away from the traditions and understanding like how poetry has evolved as an art form in the tradition, and when you lose that tradition, you cut your feet off, and you get to the point where you can say that poetry is kind of anything, which I think is a point that Andy brought up earlier that he doesn't agree with. And I think I agree with him on that point. I don't think that you can say that poetry is anything. And I think that that comes from a lack of understanding about the tradition. Yeah.
Well, I have a counterpoint. I have a caveat because I did have this conversation with this teacher and I used him in a first voice and he called me out on it. You don't have to understand protein synthesis for it to be going on through your body. Your body is continuously making protein, taking the DNA and the RNA, and through DNA transcription and RNA translation, protein, and it's happening throughout your body. You don't have to understand that for that to happen through. So sometimes I don't think you necessarily have to understand the tradition behind it to feel it, to want to go through it. Is it maybe more of an access to the concept that, hey, poetry can be you?
No, I think an art form exists in its tradition.
Okay.
Like you
have to understand the tradition in order to appreciate it, to move on?
Absolutely. And it has to keep being revivified too. You could see this in movies, in the art form of movies. We get a movie we get at least one, maybe two movies every year that are about the history of movies. Like we just had Babylon is probably the most recent example of that, is a movie about movies and about the history of movies. And it kind of serves a purpose because it continues the tradition, so that other people can be brought in and can understand what the tradition is about. And so, yeah, I think that the tradition is literally part of the art form. And if you don't have the tradition, then you don't really have the art form.
Interesting. I think I need to personally research a little bit more into the tradition in order to have a counterclaim, because I feel like I want to argue with you and debate with you a little bit on this, but I don't think I have the artillery yet to go toe to toe on you on this. But I am curious because again,
we're having a part two, aren't we?
Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I might have to cut it off a little soon if that's all right.
We can actually wrap up now because I think you're really bringing us into a closing part for us to kind of to wrap up, because again, what is poetry tradition? Again, I think you gave us some really good background as far as going back to the literary consension and Homer. But like, again, I feel like again, I'm talking about the youth. We're teachers, and there's been other people who have been wanting to because again, in evolution, we have to have traits that are passed on to the next generation that then go pass on to the next generation. We're a species because we can pass on our traits and then they can pass on their traits. So just like we said earlier, as far as if we don't have anybody else enjoying this art form as poetry, as whether it's a fan or as a community, then that's not going to go on from here. So again, do we need to understand? I think tradition enriches it. Tradition makes it maybe more evolved as a poetry form, but does tradition need to be understood for somebody who is like 15 years old to get into poetry and to like really thrive off of it? I think it goes back to the movements, the generational trauma that we can heal, or connecting as a group of people. But I think we should come back to this because I think you do actually have more artillery to kind of argue my points back too, Robert. So I don't want to go into this conversation because I know you want me to get closing this.
We should definitely do a part two soon. We'll DM you for sure. We got to do a part two, but this is really
I'm totally cool with that. I'd love to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That was another thing I wanted to bring up too. Who had access to these, with poetry tradition, something that's social and emotional and cultural involved as well. So I think this is really a good conversation that we should be having. It's again, because if we want to keep poetry as an alive art form, it has to move on to the next generation, and then to the next generation, and then to the next generation.
Amen. It gets passed on and passed on. That's good. So with that being said, do you have any last thoughts, Robert, before we end this live?
No, I thought this was fun. Thank you guys so much for asking me to do it. And it was fun to meet you, Angela. It was Angela, right?
Yes, yeah. It's Angela. Angela, lots of thoughts out, but also part of Unraveled Influence.
Yeah. And Andy, thank you for inviting me again. And I'm happy to do it again. And I thought this was super fun.